So we are reading Power versus Force by Dr. David Hawkins. We are on chapter 22, Spiritual Struggle, page number 261 of the book and page number 53 of the book.
From the understanding of consciousness at which we have arrived, we can reinterpret the struggle of man's spiritual enterprise. Pure consciousness itself, that which is described as is-this, beingness, I amness, represents the infinite potential, infinite power, and infinite energy source of all existence, identified as deity, God, divinity. Within this potential, the unmanifest becomes manifest as the avatar, Christ, Buddha, the great teacher, the great guru, whose energy field calibrates at 1000 or more. These individuals set up attractor patterns of enormous force to which the mind, with its holographic capacity to react globally to attractor fields, is subject.
So what he is saying is that divinity, that people who are operating, or that conscious awareness which is operating at 1000 plus, is the Aadhar, it's the basis, it's the foundation for anything that manifests, right? If that Aadhar was not there, or that foundation was not there, then nothing would have been manifesting over here. Okay, I think someone's annotating.
Okay. Yeah, that was me by mistake.
No issue.
Moment, but still enormously powerful, are the ordinary enlightened teachers who have taught the path to realization of the self. The self has been described by the enlightened throughout time as infinite, formless, changeless, all present, unmanifest, and manifest. Herein is the oneness, the allness, and godness of all that exists, indistinguishable from the Creator, whose power in the human realm is a giant attractor field, which allows and encompasses variation, free will, so that all paths lead to me. Teachings and other words that treat of this have typically calibrated at 700 in our studies.
So great teachers, okay, not the enlightened people as such. The great teachers, they operate at 700, right? So people like Christ, Buddha, Krishna, they are operating at 1000. But then the lower teachers bring it one rung down lower, and they are operating at 700. So the next thing that we are looking at is the 600 people.
At the energy field of 600, ordinary thought ceases. Beyond temporal linear process, existence is witnessed as knowingness, omnipresence, non-duality, because existence has no locality. The me-you duality and consequent illusion of separation disappears. This state is the peace beyond all understanding, infinite, unconditional love, all-encompassing, all-knowing, all-present, omnipowerful, and coincident with the self, which is the awareness that the manifest is one with the unmanifest.
So again, when we are going into these higher states, right, I think 600 is a state of consciousness that you would experience when you go into focus 27 or 34 maybe, right? And over there, you lose the sense of self. You are no longer just the self. You are an experience, right? And that experience connects with that higher experience. So you get into a non-dualitical state of mind, a state of consciousness, where the me disappears.
Truly spiritual states can be said to begin at a calibrated level of about 500, unconditional love, and continue to infinity. Teachers who calibrate in the high 500s and the 600s are frequently recognized as saints. Their state of consciousness is often described as sublime.
So again, teachers who are all giving, who are all encompassing, right? They are really, you'll find that again, that meanness is there, but not there at the same time. These people are calibrating at 500 and above.
It is a common experience for as yet unenlightened devotees to enter such a sublime state when in the presence of teachers whose energy fields calibrate at 550 and over. Through the process of entrainment, the dominance of a powerful attractor field, until the devotee himself arrives at the higher state of awareness, this state will not persist when he is out of the higher energy field of the teacher.
So what does this imply? When you come into the presence of an enlightened teacher, of a person who is operating at a higher frequency of vibration, you yourself will also start shifting into that particular state of vibration, right? So that's why it's very important to see whose company are we keeping? What is the level of consciousness that people around us are operating at?
Advanced spiritual seekers often fluctuate in and out of this presence of the beloved as they approach enlightenment. This loss of the higher state and descent to a lower is identified in both Eastern and Western literature as an anguish of the soul.
So when you hit that state of mind, that state of consciousness, that blissful state, right? You're constantly looking at getting back into that state. And that's again, which causes a lot of frustration. It can also cause a fall because when you can't achieve it regularly, you start missing something and then your indulgence starts and then you start to drop. That's why there's always a wavering in the way that consciousness develops. As long as it's going in an upward graph, you will have the ups and downs. You hit a spiritual high and then you can't achieve it again. It becomes very frustrating. So this is the level at which people who are used to getting entrained because of presence of a spiritual guide or a teacher, and they can't achieve it regularly on their own, it starts to frustrate them.
Spiritual work, like other intensive pursuits, such as sport, can be arduous and frequently requires the development of specific tools for the task, including an extremely focused intent and unfailing concentration. The difficulty of inner work results from the great effort required to escape from the familiar gravity of lower attractor fields and move to the influence of a higher field.
So this again becomes an issue, right? To be able to sustain yourself, to be able to hold yourself at that level of consciousness is what the game is all about, right? Also, whenever we are growing, we've discussed this before, we grow and then we come to a plateau state. This plateau state is a very, very important state in the growth process, because if you lose it over here, you'll fall down, which is when you fall down, it is again connecting with the lower attractor fields, because the lower attractor fields are easy to get into. It's very easy to be there. Whereas when you're operating at that higher state, again, once you start getting into that, it becomes effortless also. But the fact is that conscious awareness needs to always be there. You must be always checking yourself. Is the ego coming into the picture? Are you becoming selfish? Are you becoming, self-centered? Are you looking at doing things for the greater good? All these factors you need to start keeping a watch. Otherwise, it's very easy to fall down again. Yes, Kokil?
Can you explain the plateau state a little bit?
So whenever you have growth in your spiritual endeavor or any kind of sport, any kind of thing that you're practicing, right? First, there will be a growth. And then suddenly you'll find that you've stagnated. That becomes a plateau state. There's no growth anymore. And it becomes very frustrating for a person because when you're learning new things, right, there's a chaska to it. There's you get enlivened by that process of whatever is happening. But when there's stagnation and no growth is taking place, it becomes boring. And at that point in time, if you don't sustain it, then you fall. But if you can sustain it, then the next growth curve automatically starts to come. Because integration is very important. The plateau state is where you integrate what you've learned in the last growth step.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
In order to ameliorate this struggle, all religions issue prescriptions against exposing oneself to the lower energy fields. It is only from an authoritarian point of view that such error is depicted as sin. A more liberal viewpoint accepts man's dalliance in lower energy fields as pardonable failing.
So the point is that as soon as you lose awareness, right, you will get into the lower fields. But that is where resilience comes into the picture. How fast can you bounce back? Now, what I'm finding is that if the field of a person is clear, right, it's easy for the person to come out of that slump. But if the field of the person is not clear and there's resonance, which is attracted to the lower attractor fields, the person can fall and become stuck again. That's why clarity of thought, clarity of mind, clarity of emotional baggage becomes very, very important. And I'm finding this when we are doing the biofield tuning with people. When the field starts to get clear, the stars, the earth star, sun star, the channels, the chakras, they hold for a longer period of time. Okay. When there is still something which is stuck in the aura, which is stuck in the field, then it becomes easy to fall down. That's why we find that clearing ourselves becomes very, very important. And of course, over here, very clearly they say, what is the company you keep? Are you associating with the lower attractor fields? How are you resonating with the lower attractor fields? So this is where, again, we need to be cautious. And that's why all religions tell you that don't do this, don't do that. There are so many rules and regulations, right? But in my view, unless you've experienced something, you don't know what it is. So then it becomes difficult to transcend. So as much as possible, have an experience so that you know what you're getting into. You have information about what you're getting into. And then it becomes easier to transcend that particular thing. Of course, the flip side is that you may get sucked into that particular thing also. So those of you who've done the gateway voyage, we show a video called The Kernel, right? In that he says that, you're looking at this planet which is stinking, and then you go there, you want to assess what it is, and then you come here, and then you get stuck in the cycle of rebirth, because it becomes very difficult to get out of the process unless we have real good conscious awareness about what we are doing. So this becomes very important, right? How are we connecting with which area or what state of consciousness are we connecting to? And over here, another thing they say, that a sin is not a sin. Okay. Again, what is the consciousness with which you are doing an activity becomes very important, because nothing is good or bad at the end of the day.
But attitudes, emotions, and behaviors characteristic of the energy fields below 200 do, in fact, generally preclude spiritual experience. The classical chakra system, recognized by many spiritual disciplines, correlates almost exactly with the map of consciousness that has emerged from our studies.
Okay, so very clearly, okay, it says very clearly that the experience of the states of consciousness below 200 almost always precede spiritual growth, because unless you've had that experience, it becomes difficult to get into the higher states of consciousness.
The level 600 corresponds to the crown chakra, 500 to the heart, 200 and up to the solar plexus, while the lower attitudes and emotions of spite, envy, resentment, and jealousy are associated with the spleen. The base chakra has to do with animal survival, absorption with which prohibits spiritual progress. Thus, all spiritual teachings advise against worldliness, suggesting avoidance of attachment to sex or money.
So again, the Mooladhara chakra, the base chakra is related to survival, right? If I'm not, it's said that you cannot be a spiritual person or you can't pray with an empty belly. So survival becomes very, very important. And then you come into the next procreation. Then you come into accumulation of wealth. After you have done all that, then you start going into the higher levels of consciousness. So where are we operating from? Again, becomes a very big question.
The lower regions are also the locus of addictions. One can be fixated at any of the lower levels. Almost all of these energy fields and the behaviors associated with them now have given rise to specific self-help groups, all of which concur that without a spiritual context, recovery is quite unlikely.
So whenever we are stuck in the lower chakras, spiritual endeavors are what will take you out. So you are connecting to a higher attractor field, which will allow you to get out of a lower attractor field. But if you're constantly associated with the lower attractor field, it's very difficult to switch and get out of it into a higher attractor field, right? So spiritual endeavors are very important for us to raise our levels of consciousness.
In consciousness raising programs in general, a universal dictum is that one is powerless until one tells the truth. All spiritually oriented self-help groups require this first step. They are unanimous that an open mind and willingness are necessary prerequisites to progress. In other words, one must have reached an energy field of 200 in one's development to be healable.
So again, being true to your word, we read the 4 agreements. In that, the 4 tenets that he talks about is the first tenet is being impeccable with your word. So being impeccable with your word means saying the truth, being your truth. What you are saying, you are being it, right? You will do it to your best of your ability. So the 4 tenets that were there, I have it written here, is impeccable with your truth. Do not take things personally. Make no assumptions, right? So that means implies no gossiping. You are associating again with the truth. What is a fact? That is what you're associating with, and doing your best, right? So these were the 4 tenets of the 4 agreements. Now, for any spiritual endeavor, you have to be truthful to yourself. Today, if you're saying a lie, whether the other guy knows it or not, you know that you have lied. And to cover your lie, you'll have to say 10 more lies. So it's always better to be truthful. And when you are truthful, you don't have any baggage to carry. So that becomes very important in spiritual growth. Like today, if a balloon is flying, if it needs to fly high, you have to drop the sand in the balloon. Otherwise, it's not going to fly high when those air balloons where we get inside, right? So the point is we need to get rid of our baggage if we want to have spiritual growth. And that starts happening. Healing will only take place after 200. Now, when you look at the grid also, when you look at the resilience grid that we talk about all the time, anything that is below 200 is on the left side of the grid. And no manifestation, growth, healing will take place when you're on the left side of the grid. Everything, growth, healing, development, increase of knowledge, everything takes place on the right side of the grid, which is above 200, which is the exact thing that they are saying. In other words, one must reach an energy field of 200 in one's development to be healable. If you're not at that level of consciousness, you're not going to get healed, right? So it becomes very important to really understand which side of the grid are we operating from. And it's such a simple tool and so powerful, it's not funny at all. It's a part of the Resilience Advantage program. If people have not attended, I seriously think everyone should attend that program also.
Entering within the influence of fields below this entails a real danger of becoming so deeply entrained that one cannot escape. This is not always so, however. History has noted many occasions of individuals in the very depths of entrainment, suddenly breaking through to a high of consciousness.
So again, this is the aha moment. Something hits you, you have a near-death experience, or you make a big loss, you make a sudden kind of something really hits you on the head, and you have a shift in state of consciousness. Your perspective about things shift. So it is possible to do it in that way also. But the better way is to have a growth graph where you gently start moving up the graph and start becoming more and more aware. I think that is a better way to go rather than taking a hard hit and suddenly jumping into that state of consciousness. Because again, when you go slowly, you're preparing the field, you're preparing the foundation, and then you gently start going up.
Such sudden breakthroughs are still seen on occasion in modern society. This, as we have seen, was the precise experience of Bill Wilson, which resulted in the founding of AA. This experience seems typically to be characterized by a total transformation of consciousness and liberation from the entrainment of lower attractor fields and a sudden emergence into higher awareness. This type of experience, common in the early days of AA, when its members were frequently last gaspers, is not reported by high bottom members who constitute the majority of newcomers to Alcoholics Anonymous today.
So what does this imply, right? He says the last graspers, that they have surrendered, they have nothing else to do, they have nowhere else to go, right? They are totally depleted. And when something hits them at that point, or they get an awareness at that time, it shoots them into the other state. But why do we need to get into that despair? That is the basic point. Most of us are operating, if you see the levels of consciousness, we are operating from 200 to maybe 150. Most of the people are operating in that band. So he says that the lower frequency band operators do not have those ha moments. When you're totally gone, right? You're in grief, you're in total in the dumps. That time, these aha moments can suddenly start coming.
Just as the entrainment or influence of the higher energy fields has an anabolic or growth enhancing effect on a subject, entrainment by lower attractor fields has a catabolic or destructive effect. The most widespread example in today's culture is the influence of some forms of violent pop music. Among our test subjects, punk rock, death rock, and gangster rap music made every subject so weak, confirming earlier observations made by Dr. John Diamond.
So anything that is not good for you will make you weak. Okay, so we have the hand test where you press the hand, and anything that makes you weak is not good for you. It's putting you on the left side of the grid. You need to drop it. So the music that you're hearing, what are the sounds that you're hearing? Again, what are the places that you're going to? Because each space also has a vibratory frequency, right? What are the spaces that you're going to? All that will have an effect on you. The people that you're meeting will have an effect on you.
In a more recent study of students reported in the Arizona Republic, July 4, 1994, Dr. James Johnson of the University of North Carolina found rap music to increase tolerance for and predisposition to violence, materialism, and reducing both immediate interest in academics and long-term success.
So again, by associating with that rap music, you got shifted into the left side of the grid, which is a downward spiral. And naturally, you're not going to look at anything that is going to lift you up, right? So you're getting more connected to violence, to materialism, to becoming self-centered, to be selfish. All that stuff starts to come into the picture.
A common experience observed in therapy groups and clinics is that drug abusers do not recover if they continue to listen to heavy metal rock. A 1-year follow-up on inpatient and outpatient cocaine addicts from Sedona Villa, a branch of Camelback Hospital of Phoenix, Arizona, indicated that not a single cocaine abuser who continued to listen to this violent and negative music recovered.
So Bob Holbrook, who's the innovative director at the Monroe Institute, he used to be at a clinic where addicts and people who had post-traumatic stress disorder, etc., used to come. The dictate, I don't know how many of you have heard the story, but the dictate by the head of that clinic was that every patient who came had to visit Bob once, at least during the time that they were in the clinic, right? What Bob used to do was he just used to make them hear hemi-sync tracks. That's it. He never used to do anything else. Okay. And the people, when they visited his thing, they were only mandatorily told to come once, and he found each one of them repeatedly came to him. Simply because when they were hearing the hemi-sync tracks, they became cool and calm. And in the feedback, most of them wrote that that was the best session. The sessions that they had with Bob were the best sessions during their stay in the clinic, right? This is exactly what is being said over here. The kind of music that you're hearing, if it is connecting you to a higher attractor field, then it automatically becomes therapeutic and healing, right? And this is what we say, that when you're hearing hemi-sync tracks, when you're hearing these tracks which are created by the Monroe Institute, you will find that they automatically shift you into a higher state of consciousness, and it becomes very, very easy to do it with these tracks. So of course, if you're going to continue to listen to bullshit, then that is what is going to manifest in your life.
Self-help groups for the Self-help groups for the addicted invariably recommend avoiding the influence, that is, the energy fields of former lifestyle associations. These addicts found that leaving the drug was not enough. To do so was merely to attack the A to B to C of addiction. As long as they could not make the commitment of will to entirely leave the influence of the field, of which the music, like the drug, was simply a manifestation, they could not escape entrainment to the low energy attractor, the ABC of addiction.
So naturally, we also finding this, that when we go to the origin of where the habit started from, we can start eradicating. But if you don't go back to the origin of where the habit started from, the seed, where the seed was planted, the clearing does not take place, right? So like that, when you're associated with a group and your issue or your addiction started with the association from that group, unless you get out of the attractor field of that group, you're going to get back into the habit. Nothing can stop it, right? So that's why becoming aware of it and then stepping away from those fields which actually pull us down becomes very, very important. And this is where, again, conscious awareness, where are we operating from, starts to come into the picture again.
Recovered addicts who leave the energy field of their self-help programs rather predictably relapse. Besides having relinquished the infusion of the combined power of their fellow members, Their assertion that one can go it alone is a notorious symptom of an oncoming relapse because it indicates an infiltration of arrogance and pride calibrating at 175, well below the power of the energy field required for healing.
So now this also becomes very important. Group energy, group association, right? When, see, in the olden times, you had a guru who you went to and the guru guided you. The guidance was available. Today, the guidance of a guru is not available to us. That's why groups like awareness, for example, where we are meeting together, we all help each other to sustain that higher level of consciousness. If you think you can do it alone, it doesn't happen. There are many people who, think that I'll buy the CDs and I'll do the meditations at home and I'll do the exercises at home. But there is a vast difference between doing the exercises in a group setting, in a workshop setting, and doing the exercises on your own, right? Over here, which is clearly said that if you think you can do it alone, then you're operating from pride. We always need support. And this is something that even in the gateway affirmation, the third point is asking for help, right? If we can pick up the phone and ask people for help, we can empower ourselves because we have that support. And again, the people who can pick up the phone and ask for help are less prone to getting into depression because the support was there. And this was the basis of the joint family system also. If you really look at it, today the joint family system had a built-in support structure, which was very, very important. If I had a problem, there were 5 people who I could go to talk to. Now with the nuclear families coming up, that support system has started to get eradicated, which is causing so many issues to the younger people who are now growing up in nuclear families. Okay, so again, asking for help, creating a support structure for yourself becomes very, very important if we are going to stay at the higher attractor fields.
From my experience with volunteers with diseases, this self-assertion also applies, Tracy. The same principle, of course, operates in the other direction. To seek enlightenment is to seek entrainment to the most powerful attractor patterns. The key, again, is will, a constantly repeated act of choice.
So again, if we want to grow, then we need to connect with attractor patterns which are operating at a higher state of consciousness. So again, at the end of the day, it all comes and boils down to who are you associating with? What are you associating with? Where are you associating with? That becomes very important when we want to get into this growth path.
Here, the chaos theory principle of sensitive dependence on initial conditions provides a scientific explanation of the traditional way of spiritual progress. In all spiritual disciplines, the opening wedge predicated for advancing one's awareness is described as willingness.
Shivangla, just 1 second. Let me just see who's banging the thing over there. Just hold on. Shivangla, you there?
Here, the chaos theory principle of sensitive dependence on initial conditions provides a scientific explanation of the traditional way of spiritual progress. In all spiritual disciplines, the opening wedge predicated for advancing one's awareness is described as willingness. History shows what has been clinically shown as well. A persistent willingness is the trigger that activates a new attractor field and allows one to begin to leave the old. We may visualize a less attractive field approach.
Okay, so So what is happening over here? When we want that shift to take place, willingness is the key. And when you look at the levels of consciousness also, willingness calibrates at 310, right? Now today, if I'm not willing to do something, then it can never happen. We can never grow, right? So willingness, so something may come in front of you, but you're not willing to accept it. If you're not taking that opportunity, then it's going to vanish from you, right? So that openness, that willingness is the key to be able to create that shift of conscious awareness that we are looking for.
Introduction of a third element, free will, the decisive consequence of choice and evolution, suddenly creates a crossover, a saddle pattern.
Mangla, you have to start from a persistent willing.
A persistent willingness is the trigger that activates a new attractor field and allows one to begin to leave the old. We may visualize a less attractive field approaching a greater one, at which point the introduction of a third element, free will, decisive consequence of choice and evolution, suddenly creates a crossover, a saddle pattern, and change takes place.
So this is a shift that we are looking for, and we must be freely doing it, right? You cannot force anyone to do these things. So like that, what happens is, even previously we used to attempt to force people to do programs. Nowadays we've stopped forcing people. We just put it in front of them, and if they have that willingness and they are willing to take that leap of faith using their free will, then it happens. Otherwise it is not going to happen, right? And that shift has to come from inside. It cannot be forced on a person.
In Eastern spiritual disciplines, it is accepted that the devotee alone, unaided by a guru, is unlikely to make much progress. The AA experience is that a true alcoholic is unable to recover without the help of a sponsor. In sports, great coaches are sought after because their influence inspires maximum effort. A devotee can abet his own progress by merely focusing on an advanced teacher and thereby aligning with that teacher's energy field. In our testing, it was shown repeatedly that holding in mind the image of an advanced spiritual teacher made every subject go strong, irrespective of his personal beliefs.
Okay, so this is very, very important again, right? As we said, a guide, a sponsor, a mentor is very important to guide you, right? Unfortunately, these days, to get a good mentor, to get a selfless guide becomes very, very difficult. That is why support groups where we help each other becomes so much more important, right? Personally speaking, having been looking out for a guide for a very long time, I have made technology my guide. The technology helps me to go into the other states of consciousness. It allows me to see what is happening on screen so that I can become self-aware of what is actually happening, right, with me. Otherwise, the guru used to go into those altered states and could actually perceive into the student as to what was happening with the student. Nowadays, that is not possible. So we need to connect with people who are operating at a higher frequency than us. We need to be in the presence of people who are operating at a higher frequency than us. And because of that association, we can start raising our levels of consciousness. But it is not always possible to, get a good mentor who is guiding us. That's why, again, I'm repeating, the groups become very, very important. And over here, he says also, just keeping the picture of an enlightened person can raise your level of consciousness. This is something that, or make you strong. This is something that we have seen over and over again. We can actually test with the antenna, with the BG3 pendulum, etc. That today, if I'm repeating a mantra, right? If that mantra is shifting my state of consciousness or it's resonating at the issue that I want to resolve, that issue will get resolved if I'm operating a mantra. The mudras work on the same way. The yogic asanas work in the same way, right? How are they shifting your state? What is resonating with what? And what is the state that you want to go into? If you can find the correct click, it will shift your state of consciousness and make you strong. Even the Hindu Devi Devtas, right? We have so many Devi Devtas. Each one is representing a particular frequency. And we can test that remembering or picturing which Devi or Devta will make you strong in a particular aspect of your life. So all that is absolutely there, right? It was built into the cultures, but we are not aware of it because we were not told. So very clearly here, it is repeatedly shown that holding the image of an advanced spiritual teacher in mind made every subject go strong, regardless of their personal beliefs. So what is the level of consciousness with which that teacher is operating? If you keep that teacher in mind, it will automatically start raising your level of consciousness. That's why it is very important again for us to actually assess what is the level of consciousness a particular teacher is operating at before we start associating with them, and we start keeping them in our mind, because it is going to affect us.
The agency of change in spiritual struggles of personal metamorphosis is always beyond the power of the seeker. Great saints, such as Francis of Assisi, have typically asserted that they were mere channels of a higher power from without, taking no credit for personal initiative in achieving their state, which they attributed to grace.
So again, highly spiritual persons will always say it was a download. I was told to say this. It came to me, right? They're not going to operate from that egocentric state of mind, which could result in operating from pride, which is at the level of 175. They will always say it was grace. I got to know, which is operating at a much higher state of consciousness, right? So it becomes very important to see also that today, if I'm associating with someone, where is that person operating from? Is that person operating from pride? Then again, they're operating at a lower state, lower than 200. Then it becomes a problem to start associating with them.
This is illustrative of the instrumentation whereby the newcomer from a lesser level of awareness, who places himself in the influence of a higher awareness, is transformed by osmosis, that is, entrainment. Even casual observers frequently note this conspicuous absence of agency on the part of the person, so clearly transmuted by an invisible force.
So again, this is resonance, right? As soon as we come into the presence of a higher attractor field, we start raising our level of awareness, whether we like it or not. Of course, we need to be willing, right? If we totally reject it, then it's not going to happen. And this happens very, very naturally with no effort from the person who's operating at a higher energy field, right? As soon as it's effortless, it is not effortful, it simply happens. Okay.
When someone suddenly goes from the influence of a lower attractor field to that of a higher, therefore, it is often acclaimed as a miracle. The unfortunate verdict of human experience is that few escape the energy fields that gradually come to dominate their behaviors. A currently popular spiritual program designed to facilitate such escape is A Course in Miracles. The purpose of this course of spiritual psychology is to prepare the necessary groundwork to precipitate a sudden jump in consciousness through encouraging a total change of perception. In more traditional fashion, prayer and meditation also provide points of departure to rise from the influence of a lower energy field into a higher.
So again, most people will be stuck at the field level at which they are operating because they are stuck there, right? In the beginning of the book, they said that mostly the level of consciousness of the entire society raises only by 5 points in the lifetime of a person. That is something which naturally happens because of experience. But if we want to take a bigger leap out, then we need to be willing. We have to apply our free will. We have to prepare our ground. We have to create shifts in our perspective, the way that we are looking at stuff, so that that shift can come. And there are various methods of being able to do that. Course in Miracles is actually a book, but it is very much based on Christian traditions. So if someone wants to look at it, there's a full book which is available, which is called The Course in Miracles.
Physicians who have risen to energy fields at 500 and above have become powerful healers, accomplishing striking successes with treatments with which others are unable to achieve similar results, and thereby producing paradoxical data in many double-blind studies.
So this is again very important, that the consciousness of the healer starts to play a very important part in the healing process. And naturally, when you're looking at it from a normal allopathic perspective, if an experiment cannot be repeated and other people cannot perform the same thing following the same process, then it is termed, there is a woo-woo kind of thing with that, right? But people who are operating at higher states of consciousness, they can just say tathastu and the thing will get repaired, right? So healing actually also depends on the level of consciousness of the person concerned, and you cannot expect the same result with another person who's operating at a lower level of consciousness. Of course, a person operating at a higher level of consciousness will get a better result, right? But it is not possible for a person who's operating at a lower level of consciousness to be able to heal with the as proficiently as a person operating at a higher level of consciousness. So that's why who is the person you're going to get healed from starts to become very, very important, right? So many people are doing pranic healing, but one healer is better, has better results than the other healer, for example, right? Many people are doing biofield tuning, but one person will have a better result than another person. Why? Because of the level of consciousness at which they are operating.
Such inexplicable variances show the intervention of power, unaccountable by the routine causal explanation that predominates in medicine. In a holographic world, any single event is the result of all events in the universe. Events as such have no self-existent reality. The universe is man's consciousness. It requires a comprehension beyond intellect.
So what does this mean? That any one event to take place, many thousands and lakhs of events have to take place for that event to take place. For example, we are all sitting together here. So many events had to take place for us to be able to sit together over here. Someone had to develop the computer. Someone had to develop the internet. Someone had to develop the Zoom platform. Someone had to develop the camera, the monitor. The book had to be printed. Someone had to write this book. All of us had to have a space to sit in which we can actually sit down and listen to each other, right? So many things had to happen for this particular event to take place, right? And the other thing over here says the universe is man's consciousness. What does this mean, right? We are living in a consensual universe. We are all creators of this universe. All of us is contributing to its creation. If everyone decides one day that paper money has no value, it will have no value, right? So the idea here is that we are creating this world that we live in. Now, That is why, because so many consciousnesses are involved in creating this reality, it is not easy to change the reality just by one person's thinking, unless a person is operating at a really high level of consciousness and has the capacity to influence the whole. And that's why it says over here, it requires comprehension beyond our small intellect, right? Our small intellect cannot comprehend how this world is actually working and what is making it tick.
The achievements of pure reason are the great landmarks of cultural history. They have made man the master of his external environment and to some degree on the physical plane of his internal environment. But reason has its limit in more ways than one. The intellectual brilliance of the 400 level, so dazzling and enviable to those in the 300s, quickly palls for those who have transcended it.
So what is he saying over here? Most of the scientists, the geniuses that we called so-called geniuses, operate at the level of 400, right? For someone operating below that, because it is materialistically associated, becomes, they are great, right? But someone who has evolved spiritually and gone beyond 400, the material evolutions do not matter so much anymore. So the chaska, right? The value of that material growth starts to drop as soon as we start crossing over into states of consciousness which are above 400.
From a higher perspective, it is all too clear how tedious and trivial reason's infatuation with itself can become. Reason is the mirror of the mind's vanity. Ultimately, there are few things more boring to observe than self-admiration.
So again, if you start getting into pride when you are discovering something, right? You've discovered something, at the end, it can become a fall. That's why many of the great scientists, if they didn't maintain their level of consciousness, they actually fell from flavor. They suddenly totally disappeared and no one even knows of them.
Rationality, the great liberator which has freed us from the demands of our lower natures, is also a stern warder, denying our escape to the planes above and beyond intellect. For those entrained at the level of the 400s, reason itself becomes a cap, a ceiling in spiritual evolution. It is striking how many of history's great names calibrate at 499. Descartes, Newton, Einstein, dozens more. It is a sticking point, an enormous barrier. The fight to overcome it is the most common and frequently the lengthiest of spiritual struggles.
So, so what does it mean over here? That if you want rational proof for everything, right, then you will get stuck. Because what we are talking of when we are going into the highest states of consciousness, as per the consciousness scale, it is beyond the intellectual capacity of the small guy, right? So when we are going over the intellectual capacity of the small guy, we naturally, that small intellect cannot really understand what is happening. So you have to let go of reason when we start going into these higher states of consciousness. And that is a big struggle for us because the logical mind doesn't allow us to transcend that. We have to go into a whole brain state. And that's the beauty of the Monroe process, which allows the left and the right brain of the person to start operating together. So you have the logic of the left side and the all-encompassing gestalt of the right side, which allows us to transcend into higher states of consciousness.
It is not unheard of For very advanced scientists, thoroughly entrained by the influences of the level of reason, to have sudden breakthroughs and emerge into a realm of global wholeness. The world of spirituality is coincident with the world of non-deterministic science and non-linear systems, as we have attempted to show.
So again, as they are discovering stuff, many of the scientists have a spiritual experience and they transcend their logic and get into spirituality. So many of the scientists were actually indulging and accessing the deeper state of consciousness to bring it into this normal state of consciousness for these discoveries to be to actually manifest in the physical world, right? And that allows them to transcend the linear system of working into the non-linear system of working. That is, the A, B, C is happening at the same time. Rather than A is going to B will result in C, that they transcend it into A, B, C.
Our research and this presentation, in fact, are designed to facilitate rational recognition of spiritual phenomena by those who are predominantly linear and habituated to the left brain mode.
So again, when you are doing kinesiology testing, right, it transcends, it circumvents the left brain mode because the body is reacting directly. The left brain has no control, which allows then the left brain to actually rationalize, because the body is going weak, that yes, this is weak, which is not logically possible to assess.
Perhaps the construct of our map of the anatomy of consciousness can illuminate somewhat the nature of ultimate causality by illustrating that the power of creation proceeds from the top down rather than from the bottom up.
So again, levels of consciousness drop down, right? So there is an ultimate oneness which is coming down. As the levels come down, that is when physical manifestation starts taking place. And what are we here for? We are here to evolve ourselves so that we can transcend the physical materialism and get into higher states of consciousness.
It is our hope, though, not to dogmatize, but to assist the reader in a process of self-revelation, as it is our desire to address not merely that figment designated as the reader's rational self, but his entire consciousness.
So again, not on the left brain, but even the right brain. So we want to get into a whole brain state, which allows us to assess things in a wider view than a limited consciousness operating from only the rational side of our brain, which is the left brain.
In our study, it is the total person that reacts to the test stimuli. Although the subject's mind may not be aware of what is going on, his total being certainly is, or there would be no consistency to our findings. This reminds us of the observation of advanced spiritual teachers that the devotee has only to discover that which he already knows.
So again, what are we talking about here, right? That the body knows, and it is the whole which knows. And all of us know everything. Actually, nothing is hidden, right? We just do not have that conscious awareness to be able to perceive. And what does the guru do? The guru sparks that is like a spark which enlightens or ignites what is already known to us and brings it into our conscious awareness. So at the end, it is only about shifting our level of consciousness into higher states of consciousness, which is the result of, again, free will and a willingness to be able to go into these higher states. I think we can stop here for today.